This episode of Mission Log is brought to you by the official Star Trek Starships collection. Get the Enterprise D for only $4.95 when you sign up today at st-starships.com/missionlog.
Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. Episode 195, Darmok.
Cheap Trick, live at Budokan.
I think he's saying, welcome to Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast.
Elvis at the sands, his cape sparkling.
He's introducing himself as Ken Ray.
Walters and Hepburn, the tree question.
That's rude.
Well, how would you say you're John Champion?
I think I'd just say, I'm John Champion.
Ben Stein at the blackboard.
Well, you are at least as boring.
Each week on Mission Log, we watch an episode of Star Trek, taking it apart for messages, morals, and meanings, and trying to figure out whether the whole thing stands the test of time.
This week, Darmok, in which the captain and an alien are stranded on a planet to fight a dangerous foe.
Wow, you make that so easy to understand.
It's a gift.
It lacks a certain je ne sais quoi, which I think we established. Walters and Hepburn, the tree question.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Hey, we're very excited to talk again about the people that we talked about last week, the official Star Trek Starships collection.
Yes.
Where are yours set up now? Forgive me, I know you keep trying to start and I keep interrupting you. Where are yours set up now?
They're at the office, and I have the three. Yeah, I have the three built up on the little display stands they come with, and the little magazines right underneath it. I just think they look super cool there because it's very minimalist. But I just have those ships there, and they are awfully cool. And I can't help but kind of like pick them up and maybe move them around a little bit every time I go in there.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've actually I've got mine set up at my desk. I'm not at my desk this week. I'm traveling, but. Normally, they are just right above where my computer screen ends. So when I look up, there they are right there. One of them's aimed straight at me, but the other two are aimed at it. So I figure I'm safe.
Very good. Very good. If you don't know what we're talking about, what we're so excited about, this is a subscription Starship collection, and it is the official, authorized by CBS Studios, Star Trek Starships collection. I have to tell you this. I have to start out by saying that, the whole subscription idea for collectibles has really caught on the last few years. And I've had some of those. I'm not going to name names, but I have signed up for those things where you automatically get charged a few bucks a month and you get a package in the mail and you open it up and you go, oh, wow, I just got cool stuff that I didn't even know existed. And can I tell you, I have canceled them because nothing that I got was ever as good as this. These models are so nice. They're very cool looking. They're such a quality build, and they're the right size. They're not gigantic. They're not tiny. They're big enough to have enough detail to look very professional, and that's what I like about them. And what's cool is that when you sign up, so not only do you start out with the Enterprise 1701D, but the further along you go, you see that there's ships from everywhere. They're from every incarnation of Star Trek, from the beginning to the most recent movies. And I think that's such a cool idea that you can kind of build this fleet of your very own.
The other thing that's really cool, I talked last week about how much I love the Bird of Prey. And I'm actually starting to love the Bird of Prey even more because one of the things that's really cool about the ships in particular is they look the way they're supposed to look. But that's not just to say that they're like proportionally. The nacelle is the right size for the nacelle and all that stuff. The Enterprise 1701, generally speaking, was a fairly clean machine, right? The Bird of Prey, it's got a bit of scoring on the back from I guess from the thrusters. I don't know what that would be exactly, but it's like a rough and tumble ship, and the paint job on this, it's not like they made, okay, so here's what a Bird of Prey looks like. It's like, no, here's what a Bird of Prey in space would look like. This is that machine has been through the ringer, the little one that's sitting on my desk, whereas like the NX-01 or the Enterprise 1701. I guess that was after the refit, but before they started picking up letters. So it's
before the A. Yeah.
Right. So it's a very clean machine. And at like that level of detail, it's not even just, yes, it's got the right number of windows, and yes, the nacelle is the right size compared to the saucer section, but it's also, no, these are battleships, so put a little battle damage on there, won't you? Which is, I mean, that level of detail is just something I noticed actually after we talked about it last week.
Yeah, it's not like the kind of thing you just walk into a toy store and pick it up and it's sort of the same stamped out paint job on everything. There's a lot of care and a lot of attention given to the way that these look. So I can't wait to see what comes next. That's what's so cool, is that even though you start out with the 1701D and you can kind of look ahead to see what's coming, there's more and more and more coming. They haven't stopped. And it's sort of like a subscription to a magazine. They will just keep making it as long as people are buying them. And you can start your collection very easily with 1701D for $4.95. And that includes shipping. So free shipping. And you get this really nice model of a 1701D. You can cancel your subscription at any time, but who would want to? Because 2 times a month. It's not even like you get one and you sort of forget about it for a while. No, twice a month you will get a Starship collectible delivered to your door.
Yes.
And it couldn't be easier to sign up. Why don't you tell people, remind them again how they can find out more information and sign up?
It is st-starships.com/mission log. And, you know, not to be self-serving, but don't forget the mission log part, because that tells them that you heard about them through us, which, of course, certainly helps out this show. And, st-starships.com/mission log. And just get your collection going.
It's funny. We heard from a listener on Twitter who is in Canada, and now this will direct you to the United States version of that website. So you're paying in U.S. dollars. But our listener is in Canada, and he said, "I'm going to the Eagle Moss booth at a convention up here, so I can start my subscription there. But I will tell them that Mission Log sent me."
That's very cool.
It is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No doubt. So st-starships.com/mission log. Now, I do have a thing. Of course, I always give out the contact information. And the reason we save the contact information until after this, I started off by asking John where he has his set up. I would love to see how people set theirs up as well. So, I mean, if you just like carry them around or put them on your desk or whatever, that's cool. But if you've got some kind of setup, or if you just want to show off what you've got, we'd love it if you sort of shared that with us too. So I guess the best way to do that is probably email missionlog@roddenberry.com. I guess so people could post it on our Facebook page as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So Mission Log Pod is the address to find us on Facebook, Skype, and Twitter. There's no point in Skyping us a picture, but if you want to post a picture on Facebook, or if you want to post a picture of what you've got on Twitter, or, of course, this is good for any other contact information as well, comments on shows that we've done in the past or shows that are coming up, trivia that you want to share with Mr. Champion, and he, by the way, will be sharing trivia with you in a moment. Mission Log Pod is the address to find us, Facebook, Skype, and Twitter. Phone number 323-522-5641. Again, I did say the email was missionlog@roddenberry.com. We do have our website, missionlogpodcast.com. All kinds of places to get in touch with us. And please do remember and do believe that we may use your comments on an upcoming episode of Mission Log. And now, Champion at the Pie, Kira at Bashi.
Here we go. Trivia for Darmok. Today's teleplay was written by Joe Menosky at the urging of Michael Piller. He had kind of handed this off to Joe to work on. And the story had actually been gestating for a long time. They had been kicking around this idea for a good couple of years by the time it actually was filmed. Now, the story is credited to Philip Lezebnik and Joe Menosky. We talked about Philip before. He wrote the Next Gen episode Devil's Due. And we talked before about his background that ran from animated shows to Danish TV to writing Disney movies. He also has a background in the classics, meaning ancient literature, not Frank Sinatra, and Greek language that might have some relevance to details in this episode. Ken, what is Darmok spelled backwards?
Ramjet.
Very close.
Thank you.
Very close. Darmok backwards, Komrad, or if you say it, comrade.
So this is a subversive episode, you mean?
It is. It is.
All right.
We mentioned Gilgamesh in this episode. What is Gilgamesh? Well, of course, the story is told in the episode, and actually the entire story of Darmok and Gilad at Tanagra is a retelling of the myth of Gilgamesh. It is a Sumerian myth. It is one of the oldest known stories in human history, dating to about 2,000 years BCE. So if you haven't brushed up on your cuneiform reading, you can and read the Gilgamesh in its original language.
I want to say, though, I think there's a more important question.
Yes.
What is Gilgamesh spelled backwards?
You'll have to get back to me on that.
Okay, I will do that. I'll work on that while you continue.
All right, please do. We have a mention of a ship here, the USS Shikumaru. Now, I do like to figure out what ship names mean, and this is one that is probably not what you think. This is not a ship taken from history and then stuck into an episode of Star Trek. It's not named after a specific ship. Now, you could take the word Shiku, and that could refer to a place called Shiku, which is the name of a place in Japan. It's also the name of a place in China. There are a lot of similar words and descriptions in those two languages. If you take the word maru, well, in Japanese, it literally means round, but it has other contextual meanings like to place upon or place around. And a lot of ships carry that name maru on the vessel name. But here's what I thought was really interesting. If you break down the word shiku, shi and ku, shi means death, ku means island. So I learned this because I have a friend who is Japanese American. He has a tattoo with the word shi on it, and then followed up by banbatsu, not just so you think he's got the word shi on his arm for no good reason. And that actually then means from death comes creation or comes life. But he's the one who helped me kind of break down what this word means. And I thought, well, how appropriate for this episode that shiku would have some meaning about where this takes place and what happens.
Yes, so, kind of like a couple of people at Tanagra.
Yeah, you would think.
Yeah,
you would
maybe.
think.
Yeah.
Right. So how about that Picard jacket? Yes,
Want one.
Wardrobe. I know, right? I think we all do. But here's the thing, and I didn't realize this. This is the first and only time that we see this particular configuration of that jacket.
Really?
It's got kind of the leather shoulder pads on it. Yeah.
I knew it was the first time that we'd seen it. I didn't realize it was the only time.
Well, it was the only time we see this particular model. Okay. Now, we keep the jacket design, but the material changes. The shoulder pads that kind of have that leather finish to them. We don't see that model on the later uses of the jacket. Yeah. So if you have this one, then you have very specifically the jacket from Darmok. Something that was fixed in the Next Generation remastered, and it's worth pointing out here because it's one of the few very significant changes. There is a phaser blast that comes from the Enterprise, and in the episode as originally aired, that phaser blast came from the photon torpedo launcher. And Rick Sternbach says they got a lot of mail from people saying, you fired the phasers from the wrong place. So in the remastered HD version, they went back and fixed that, and they used a shot of the Enterprise actually firing phasers from the primary hull where you have seen it before. And then let's talk about shooting location. The actual location footage in this episode was done at Bronson Canyon. Now, if you're not familiar with L.A., you may think, oh, well, they went way, way out into the woods and they found this canyon, and it was a perfect location for this episode. Well, here's the thing, though. If you look at a map of L.A., Bronson Canyon is literally like right over there. It's kind of funny to me because it's sort of like saying we're shooting in the wilderness of Central Park.
Yeah.
It could not be more surrounded by city if it tried. And yet they got great use out of it. It's been used for a lot of TV shows.
Is that where they shot MASH?
No, that was the 4077 camp was actually further out. That was getting closer to Malibu. Now, it doesn't mean they didn't shoot some scenes there, but the actual camp was further out.
Okay.
You got stuff from Batman and all kinds of stuff that was shot in and around Bronson Canyon. And if you're anywhere near Hollywood, you are a stone's throw from Bronson Canyon. Now, two guest stars of note to talk about here. Ashley Judd as Ensign Leffler. This is the first professional acting credit for Ashley Judd. She, of course, is the daughter of Naomi Judd and sister of Winona Judd. Now, it's no question that she is very well known. She's had a very diverse career. While her mother and sister were making a name for themselves as the country music duo The Judds, Ashley was taking a more traditional route of going to school and then moved back to L.A. to start her acting career. She was in Kiss the Girls, Frida, Olympus Has Fallen, the TV shows Sisters and Missing. She played the Norma Jean half of the HBO movie Norma Jean and Marilyn. More than all that, though, she has made a name for herself as a spokesperson for a number of social advocacy topics, from feminism to population growth to Youth AIDS International. There's a lot to her, and she will be back for one more episode of The Next Generation. Now, interestingly, she was on the lot auditioning for something other than Star Trek. There was murmuring among those casting directors and producers, and they asked, can we cast you for a guest role on Star Trek right now? And they meant literally right now. She was sent immediately to wardrobe to get fitted. So kind of an interesting happenstance that she got this role, and she wasn't even auditioning for that role. We also have to talk about Paul Winfield playing Dathan here. He is really terrific, the late Paul Winfield. Now, of course, we talked more about him in The Wrath of Khan, in which he played Captain Terrell. You can go back and listen to that one. Career highlights include playing Martin Luther King Jr., for which he received an Emmy nomination, and his role in Sounder, which got him an Academy Award nomination. He also appeared in Terminator, Damnation Alley. He was in a movie in 1973 called The Horror at 37,000 Feet. Does that sound familiar? Kind of like a Twilight Zone episode? Well, it should. And in fact, that movie co-starred William Shatner and another Star Trek alum, France Whedon. There's so much to his career, we hardly do it justice here. His voice booms through the true crime series City Confidential, if you've ever caught that. He passed away in 2004 at the age of 64.
HAL 9000. At Jupiter. The door is closed.
Prologue. An interesting mission ahead. The Enterprise is on its way to an uninhabited El Adrel system to meet up with a Tamarian ship. That ship, sending out a nondescript but directed signal, could represent the opening of a relationship between the Federation and the mysterious Children of Tama. They've been in contact before, but all the negotiating fell flat when none of the prior Federation representatives could make sense of what the Tamarians were saying. Picard is optimistic that this time it will be different, with a little patience and imagination. The first encounter with the Tamarian ship is confusing. The captain of that vessel is pleasant, but he's just saying stuff that no one on the Enterprise can figure out. Names, locations, no sense to it all. Picard puts on his diplomatic face and starts addressing the other captain. Greetings, we come in peace, how about lunch? They don't get what Picard is saying either. There seems to be some disagreement on the Tamarian bridge, more names and locations like Darmok, Tanagra, Burns, Allen. Then their captain holds two daggers and repeats the phrase Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra, and he and Captain Picard simultaneously materialize from their locations. Too late for Worf to stop it, Picard is gone, and along with the other captain on the surface of the planet below. Don't plan on getting him back either. The Tamarian ship is messing with the ionosphere, preventing transporters from working. On the surface, Picard finds himself confronted with the Tamarian captain, arms outstretched over his head, holding the two daggers. Act 1. Conveniently, the Tamarian ship allows the Enterprise scanners to see what's going on down below, but inconveniently, there's no way to communicate with or beam up Picard, what with that field distortion. Riker, now in command, can't get through with any sense to his opposition, so it's time to formulate a plan like sending Worf down in a shuttle to pick up Picard. Dathan, we'll call him that because we need to call him something, presents Picard with one of the daggers while insisting Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra, which Picard takes as an invitation to fight, an invitation he refuses. Dathan looks disappointed. Later that night, it's time for Picard to show off his Boy Scout skills, trying to start a fire with sticks. It's not working so well, and a few meters away there's Dathan with a look of self-satisfaction and a roaring fire of his own. While Picard struggles and resigns himself to freezing overnight, Dathan prepares to get some shut-eye with a kind of ritual, placing small metallic objects around him and tapping his forehead with 3 fingers. But he can't sleep, not with Picard being all pathetic over there. Dathan picks up a stick from his fire and tosses it to Picard while stating Timba. The word Picard thinks means fire, but then followed by arms wide open, just like Creed taught us. Picard assumes this is a gesture, a statement of friendship, and is thankful to be able to build a little campsite of his own. Act 2. Riker's cunning plan to send a shuttlecraft down to the planet to pick up Picard? Don't count on it. The dispersion field being generated by the Tamarian ship is one thing, but they actually opened fire on the shuttle, causing Riker to abort that mission. No one was hurt, though. It was a precise hit to the nacelle, causing Worf to turn back. The Tamarians clearly meant it as a warning, but with no intent to harm. Geordi is trying to science his way out of the problem. Maybe they can break through with a transporter beam to rescue Picard. Worf is trying to Klingon his way out of the problem, suggesting that they take on the Tamarians. Riker sides with caution rather than war. In the meantime, he wants Deanna and Data to use a third approach, thinking their way out of the problem, maybe trying to understand what motivates the Children of Tama. So they do, with the help of the computer, trying to determine what words like Darmok mean. Apparently, there are a lot of meanings, and the difficulty is not only knowing which one is the right one, but the context in which the Tamarians are using it. Luckily, the Enterprise computer can help them make at least one distinction. Darmok is the name of a mythic hunter, and Tanagra is an island. Picard awakens to find Dathan has left his camp. He finds what appears to be Dathan's logbook, a Bible, instruction manual. No time to look at it too deeply, though. Dathan comes running back, shouting about Darmok and holding a dagger toward Picard. Assuming this is the moment they are to fight, Picard flat out refuses. Then the two hear a menacing growl from somewhere in the mountains. The tone now changes for Dathan from urgency to fearful resignation. Act 3, it's the Predator! Or at least a relative so similar we might as well call them Patty and Kathy. Invisible for now, but it makes a menacing noise and knocks over rocks like Kachamp. Back on the bridge, they're aware that something is down there and it might endanger Picard. Time for Geordi to get that trick with the transporter going, but he and Ensign Leffler are not sure it's going to work. Riker says he doesn't care, even if it reveals to the Tamarian ship what they're up to. Just as Picard is making a little progress with Dathan, understanding the metaphors he's using to describe a battle plan, the transporter kicks in to rescue Picard. That couldn't come at a worse time. The creature is scoring blow after blow against Dathan. Picard wants to go back to help, and it doesn't matter that no one can hear him because the transporter rescue plan has failed too. When Picard does rematerialize on the planet, the situation is not good. The creature has weakened Dathan tremendously, to the point where all he can mutter is a phrase that seems to indicate failure. Shaka, when the walls fell. Act 4. At a briefing, the Enterprise crew are aware that Picard is fine on the surface, for now, but the Tamarian is not doing well. A plan is cooked up to knock out the Tamarian ship's systems, at least long enough to retrieve Picard. It won't be easy, but Geordi thinks after a few modifications to the phasers, he might be able to do it. He just needs some time. Deanna and Data fill Riker in about the problem they're facing. The Tamarian language is going to be almost impenetrable for them. It's all metaphor based on myth and imagery, but without the stories that go along with the myth, there's no way for them to understand context. Picard is faring better than his crewmates. As Dathan struggles, Picard picks up details of the story of Darmok and Jalad, two warriors who arrived at Tanagra alone to fight a beast, then left together as friends. The metaphor is clear now. Dathan hoped that by facing a similar challenge, they too would become allies. Danger shared might bring two people together. But Dathan is getting weaker and weaker by the moment. He asks Picard to tell a story of his own, which he's reluctant to do. Seeing the desperate position Dathan is in, though, Picard tries to recall an appropriate Earth story. Hope and Crosby at Morocco. No, that won't do. Martin and Lewis at the Copa. No, that's not right. Aha! Gilgamesh and Enkidu at Uruk. Just as Picard wraps up the story of the two warriors and the death of Enkidu after fighting the bull, Dathan shuffles off this mortal coil. Act 5. Riker's trigger finger is getting itchy. He needs to get the captain back, even if it means war with the Tamarians. Some more bad news. Data is able to tell that Dathan is likely dead, and that creature is coming back to finish off Picard. With barely a moment to spare, the Enterprise phasers are fired at the Tamarian ship, knocking out the particle emitter. Picard is about to become creature meat when O'Brien uses the open window to beam him back up safely. How do the Tamarians take being fired upon? About as well as you would think. They have weapons that pack a punch. In just a few hits, the Enterprise loses shields and warp capability. When it looks like this one-sided fight is about to be over, Picard strides into the bridge and asks for a communication channel with their foe. Lucky for everyone that Picard has learned enough of Tamarian myth to tell the story. Picard and Dathan at Eladrel closely mimics the story of Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra. Dathan may have been beaten by the beast, but here's Picard with arms open. The Tamarian commander understands what happened, and the fight is off. As they retreat, Riker asks if all is well, and Picard informs him that at the very least, they haven't made an enemy today. Later in his ready room, Picard is reading, it's not Shakespeare. It's Homeric myths written in Greek because Picard is just that good. He's hoping that understanding of his own mythic history might lead to better collaboration with Tamarians. With that, Riker leaves, and Picard produces the dagger that Dathan gave him, staring out into the void, and touches 3 fingers to his head, as he saw Dathan do. The end.
Got a question for you. This is one of those geeky Star Trek things that it has taken me forever to notice, but I'm finally starting to.
Okay.
You say there are a lot of meanings for Darmok. Do you remember how many?
For specifically the story that
when they asked the computer, so tell us about Darmok, and the computer's like, yeah, there's this one, there's this one, there's this one.
Yep.
And finally, Troy's like, stop it. How many are there?
47.
47.
We haven't been doing that on our show because there's just so many.
Finally, just starting to pick up on it.
No, you're kidding.
I'm not kidding. I've heard people talk about it before, even, but I'm finally just starting to hear it now. So I assume it'll be driving me crazy.
It'll drive you crazy. And there's a lot of little ones, too, where there'll be a lot of other numbers, but then you'll kind of plant 47 in the middle of that.
Okay.
So it's just everywhere. I mean, I'm sure that there's a website somewhere, 47.com, that has got just every 47 in it.
All right.
There's a bunch. Yeah.
It was over 47 years ago that we made contact with the Children of Tama.
Yes. Yeah. It was about 100 years ago.
It was about 100 years ago.
About 100 years ago.
Taken all of that time to go. Was there something we should be looking at?
I know, right? So we've been in touch that long.
Right.
Did anybody take notes?
No.
Why wasn't Data trying to work on the language before they got there? If he read the logs of who else had been in contact, you would think that would be a thing. It's like, why did these negotiations fall apart? Because they couldn't understand each other. Here's what they were saying. Yeah. It seems like that's a thing. Starfleet is good at working on some things, like dedicating resources to being worried about the Borg, based on information gleaned from the Enterprise. But they weren't too good at this.
No, what's crazy to me, though, is even in this episode they did that. So they come across the Children of Tama. And Data, I think, says something like, if we actually tried working on what it is they're trying to say, it might be helpful. And then nothing. Mm-hmm. And then I think it's Act 2 where Data's like, I said earlier, if we studied this, maybe it would be helpful. And Riker says, okay, do it. And I'm like, so really Data was going to wait around until he got the order to do that? I would think that he'd be running like some subroutine or something that would still be looking through all that stuff or setting up something on the computer to go through it all. They actually should have shown up and the computer would be like, oh, yeah, got this.
Yeah, right, right.
Let me tell you the story in detail.
Yeah, Data just does not seem to be very forthcoming with any work that has to do with the Children of Tama until he's told.
Not very proactive, right? Not taking it upon himself, but waiting. Maybe that's a Riker thing. Maybe Riker's like, hey, what are you doing? I was tying my shoe. Did I tell you to tie your shoe?
Right.
Okay, tie your shoe. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, maybe he still feels a little hurt by Hudson. You know, maybe that was the problem there.
Maybe so.
Yeah, yeah. I watched this and I was reminded of a movie that I liked way back when it came out, Enemy Mine. Mm-hmm. Of course, I'm still very much amused that on local TV in Birmingham sometime in the late 80s when it showed up, the Chiron read Enemy Mime, which I thought would also be a really interesting movie.
That'd be an awesome movie.
That would be, yeah. But for those who don't remember it, Dennis Quaid, Lou Gossett Jr., they are the astronaut and the alien trapped on a planet who are enemies but have to band together to survive. Yeah. So good little movie.
Never seen Enemy Mine, but aware of it to know that there were similarities here. Like I always think of Enemy Mine when I see this, but I, for some reason, never go back and watch Enemy Mine anyway. Don't know why. Well, I'll tell you what this reminded me of, though, was Classic Track.
Sure.
This is TOS just in a really awesome way. Yeah. I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It definitely has that feel. You could easily place Kirk in that situation.
Yes. You could place any captain in this situation, honestly. Archer, Sisko, Janeway, name it.
Who are those people?
Spock, maybe. Well, no, Archer you would know.
Oh,
you may have just forgotten. He was a long time ago. Longer ago than Kirk. Yeah.
Very long.
The other ones, I don't know. I'm just making up names. I think might be what happened there. Hey, I figured you would just jump all over this the way Troy did. Worf's like, you know what we ought to do? We ought to hit people. And Troy almost seems to discount Worf's worry. He didn't say we should hit people. He's like, oh, the Tamarians, this could be threats. We don't understand what they're saying. It might be threatening. And she almost gives him a look like... I mean, I want to now say obscenities because that's what I heard. Oh, you dip, Klingon, kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
But just in her look, and she's like, yeah, no, I get nothing like that off any of this.
Yeah,
you carapace-headed something.
So put a sock in it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it kind of has become this running gag about Worf. He's just always ready to shoot. And there's a really subtle moment. The first time they're in the conference room and they're talking about this situation, and I'm trying to think of the blocking. Riker is a little bit in front of Worf. Worf has his arms crossed. He's saying that he sees this as a threat and they should be ready to fight and blah, blah, blah. And Riker shuts him down. And no, we're going to find a peaceful situation out of this. And if you just look, it's a split second. You look at Worf's reaction and he kind of just glances to the side. And even though his arms are crossed, he kind of does this he just sort of opens up his arms a little bit like, oh, great, I get discounted again.
Yeah.
I think my answer's a bit. Go back and look at that. It's a quick shot, but man, it says so much.
You almost feel like Worf knows now. Like, well, I had to try.
Yeah. Like, there we go again.
Yeah. What do I do? I'm the security guy. I'm trying to make sure everybody's secure. Right. I said my piece.
Yep.
Yeah.
In a fight, when the Tamarians open fire on the shuttle, or any fight for that matter, how do they give orders and line up their plasma weapons?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I found myself wondering how they build models.
Yeah, right.
Or build ships, but especially building models, because how instructions on building models are difficult enough.
Yeah.
So all of the instructions would be like instructions from other models.
Right. So it would be worse than IKEA.
Right. It would be terrible.
Way worse than IKEA.
Because then if you hadn't built the model of the Starship Yamato, then the instructions for how to build the Enterprise would do you no good. What does it mean? Nacelles at Yamato. Yeah. You just throw it away and never do anything. Yeah, I was wondering about that too. How have they built weapons so advanced when all they can say is, no, like that other time. No, the other time. No, the other time. Okay, now you got it. Right.
Yeah.
And everybody has to know every story as well. Like every story.
And it's funny because even if the captain of the Tamarian ship said to the gunner, If he said something in metaphor, which means shoot that other ship, but don't shoot them too hard,
right.
Just damage the nacelle. What is the gunner looking at to make that happen? Does he have a readout that is also in metaphor? You know,
that's a
like
great
you could
idea.
Really go down the rabbit hole on this.
You
know?
could. How do you not? Actually,
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Oh well.
Yeah. I'd imagine trying to order a sandwich in a restaurant with one of these guys. You know, that would be the worst.
That would be, yeah. Have you seen When Harry Met Sally? I guess that would be the question. Yes. I'll have what they had. That's how you do that,
right.
I think.
Right.
I did find myself, not to keep harping on Worf's, trigger happiness. I was bothered by Worf's willingness to do something without knowing whether there was a right thing to do. It's like the time that Data said to Picard, "Do you want to leave orbit?" And Picard's like, "And go where?" It's like that, right? Picard applauded Worf's willingness to learn and practice patience and redemption, but that's not always his strong suit. His need or his desire to do something is very much in character here, but I still found it to be kind of a bummer. But, I mean, again, he is a Klingon. He is security. And while he knows that might not always make right, might's what he's got. And, sitting around. And to his credit, he didn't go ahead and blow something up anyway. I mean, he had to go ahead and say, "Here's what I can do." Everybody shows up and says, "Here's what I can do." And then Riker goes, "Okay, you and you and you just hang back a bit. We may need you later, but for now, lay that pistol down, boy. Lay that pistol down."
Well, maybe what's funny about it is that, again, it's Worf asserting his Klingon-ness. So it would be a different thing if it were the kind of security officer who would say, "Okay, Captain, look, here are your tactical options if it comes down to that.
Right.
Here's a weakness. Here's our strength. Here's what we could do just so you've got all your options out on the table. Now I'll step away and you decide how you're going to handle this." But instead, it's Worf saying, not just here are your tactical options, but I think we should start shooting. It's a little bit different.
Yeah.
A little bit different.
One of my favorite phrases, "When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail." That's Worf.
Yep.
That's Worf right there. Hey, you know what I can do? And let me do that, please. No?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I'll be over here.
Hey, I feel like this is kind of an important moment in Star Trek history. I used to say that Act 3 in the original series always meant Ripped Shirt Kirk.
Yeah.
And now it's Ripped Shirt Picard.
Yeah. Kind of surprising, yet there was no blood.
No.
That was a very close call.
Yeah, it was. It could have just been Picard guts everywhere had that been closer.
It could have been, yeah.
Speaking of pieces of Picard, there's this really odd line, I thought, in the transporter room. They radioed down to find out how O'Brien is doing with rescuing the captain. He says, "I've got a piece of him."
Yeah.
And I thought the answer is, so is that enough? like is it a big piece?
Right.
Can we just take that piece and go?
Can we grow the rest of him from that piece?
Right.
Yeah.
You never know. Yeah. I was watching this episode a couple of times with headphones on, and I noticed that in the nighttime scenes, the effects track, the sound effects track on El Adrel, there are crickets, and I thought there were coyotes in the background too, which I thought was pretty interesting. This uninhabited planet, except it has all the flora and fauna of Earth.
Yeah.
But I get it. It's atmosphere.
I was gonna say, well, here's a little secret too, though. It's actually not far from where you live.
Oh, right.
Where there are crickets and coyotes.
And coyotes. Yeah. Yep. I like that we've used the Picard stares out a window ending again.
Yeah.
Every now and then it's good for a dramatic ending. It's kind of becoming his thing. The ripped shirt was Kirk's thing. Now Picard's got a thing other than just fixing his uniform.
Yeah. Troubling standing there with a weapon this time, though.
Yeah, right.
That's a little. It goes from contemplative to should we call someone?
Exactly. I do have some questions. I don't know if they will come up a little bit later as we talk about how the plot of this and maybe the motivations of this broke down. But I did think, what if the Tamarians had miscalculated? What if Picard beamed down and then died immediately from infectious disease? because they didn't know that he could handle or not handle what was on that planet. Or just what if he was a terrible fighter? You know, what if they beam down Picard and they just assume that everybody can fight with a knife? And what if that was really not Picard's thing? What if they say, I don't know, beam down somebody else who wasn't such a good fighter? What if Wesley was still on board and they just decided, we'll take your youngest crewman and that'll be how we reenact Jalad and Darmok? So there might have been some poor choices there, or at least some short-sighted choices there. And then I wondered another thing. Would Picard have done the same thing in Riker's place, i.e. risking war with a powerful enemy to save one person on the planet below? Let's say that Riker had been the one beamed down, and they're waiting, and we're talking about opening fire, and maybe somebody down there is dead, and at what point does Picard say, yeah, I believe in not shooting this other ship so much that we're going to get out of here?
Colossus. Under the Mountain. Decision made.
I think one of the things that a lot of people can find fault with, or at least maybe be a little critical, nitpicky about, is this whole idea of the Tamarian language. And of course, everything, all the action of this show revolves around that language. The whole arc for Picard revolves around that language. And it's a fascinating idea. It is an absolutely great idea. And if I'm not mistaken, some of the early drafts of the script actually didn't have that part. Or maybe not drafts of the script, but story drafts didn't actually have that part. It was more just like the story of the captain and an unknown being stuck together and have to do something together, and that's how they form a bond. But then you introduce the idea of myth and language as something that they have to work through. But I thought about an interview that I saw with Reza Aslan. Have you ever heard of him?
Yes.
Biblical scholar, sort of religious studies scholar. I don't always agree with everything that he says, but I think he's a fascinating guy, and certainly he does his homework. And something that he was describing one time, talking about literal readings of religious texts. And he was talking about the way people told stories at the time of, Jesus's life on Earth. And the thing that I thought was so fascinating with him describing it is that if you were to ask somebody from that time about the literal factual value of a story that is told versus sort of the moral truth or the emotional truth of a story, they actually wouldn't understand that there was a difference. They wouldn't understand that you were supposed to pick something apart for the literal factual information in a story, because all stories were told with the premise that they were there to serve as metaphor and serve as something that would have a moral or emotional impact. And I thought that was really fascinating, because I thought about him describing that and then thinking about this culture. Now, we're taking it to an extreme here with Darmok. We're taking it to an extreme where they only speak in metaphor. Right. But I thought, well, this is kind of what Reza Aslan was talking about, where it's so ingrained in the culture that you don't stop to say, well, is this story documentary? Or is this story, or is this story just sort of like a metaphorical thing for us to wrap our minds around the moral idea buried within? Because they wouldn't have even made the distinction. And I thought that was absolutely a cool thing to ponder, because sure, given a cultural context, you can actually make the case for people who don't make that distinction. So it's not as big a leap then to at least present this idea of an alien culture that kind of does the same thing, or at least a similar thing. Yeah. So if you're interested, look up Reza Aslan. There's a lot of them out there talking about other stuff, but you may actually come across that interview as well. But of course, there's a big downside to that kind of language and that kind of use of language. If it's all referential to stories, then what did we do before the stories? And also, what if the stories are misremembered or misinterpreted? What do we do if someone hasn't heard all the stories? How do you explain them? So when you've got a young child who is a child of Tama, somebody who hasn't heard all the stories yet, is it just parents just like, they keep saying Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra until they think he gets it? Or do they sit down and say, here's Darmok, and he was a guy, and he was like this, and he was on the ocean, and then he got to an island, and then at some point do they just forget the rest of the details of the story? You have to have, I mentioned ancient Sumeria. You have to have the version of that story to be able to make the reference. So there's a bit of a complication there.
Well, the story itself is metaphor, right? I mean, the story of people talking in metaphor is metaphor as well. To me, the whole point was not the semantics of how their language was built, but the fact that Picard has to walk a mile in Darmok's shoes, if you don't mind yet another Elvis reference.
Yeah, good.
He's got to see where he's coming from. He's got to live that. This can't be the kind of thing where he can sit on his ship and sit, on one side of a view screen and the other guy sits on the other side of a view screen and they're going to come to some kind of terms. It's been 100 years of trying that off and on and they've never been able to do it. So then Dathan actually puts Picard in a situation where they have to be Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra. They have to both be in danger. They either have to work together or they will die. And if you take out that last part, then you put them in a situation where they're both in this together. And on the one hand, you can say, well, that's the fault of Dathan because he put them in that situation. But on the other hand, you can say that he's illustrated for Picard the need for all living things to learn of each other and work together. Or, when they actually come across a real threat, the Borg maybe, or, some other outside threat that might end up, affecting both of them. They've got no frame of reference. Then they end up, at the very least, they're incomprehensible to each other. At worst, they've actually, misspoken and fired upon each other for no better reason than they didn't take the time to actually learn or to actually do. So, there are definite problems.
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand why the computer couldn't actually, through the universal translator and doing all the cross-referencing, go ahead and make what they're saying make sense to everyone.
Right.
But that's getting caught up on the minutia. The fact of the matter is, ultimately, this is not about a group that speaks in metaphor. This is about the need to understand where the other party with whom you're dealing is coming from. If you're gonna move 10 feet as a society going forward.
Yeah. We may already be doing the morals, meanings, messages as we do this part of our discussion. But, immediately I thought, this is sort of an evergreen problem. So in terms of its relevance, this isn't something that's really going away anytime soon that I can think of. The problem today, one might say, is that we have so many words and yet so little understanding. One needs only to take a look at social media. Everybody has access to words all the time. Everybody has a voice all the time. And yet how easy it is to let that devolve into bickering and arguing rather than finding common ground. And it seems that the more we have access to that kind of conversation, the more it escalates that language to then become at the least unfriendly and at the worst vitriolic and hateful, So I think it was Deanna who said it, her line of a single word can lead to tragedy, which is true. But it's a single misunderstanding that I would say could lead to tragedy.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of things really quickly. You mentioned Deanna saying that. I can't remember which episode it was, but they were talking about dealings with some other culture. I think it was somebody that Picard was going to have to say everything exactly right, and if he didn't say it exactly right, they would end up in war. And she was talking about all the subtleties and all the differences, and she held up the cup. Yeah. And she said, if I hold this up to you, what does it mean? And Picard's like, drink, cup, coffee. And she's like, yeah, okay, sure. It could also mean wet, could also mean cold, could also mean a number of things. I kind of like the idea, and of course, you can't always do this, unfortunately, but I like the idea that maybe we could start assuming that everybody's not out to get you or insult you or screw you over. It's the song sadly I only know the Smash Mouth version, although I'm fine with it. But the song Why Can't We Be Friends? The line is, sometimes I don't speak right, but did I know what I was talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, you can get caught up in how something is said as opposed to what the meaning behind it actually is. And as I feel certain, if you and I stopped what we were doing right now and turned on the television, we would find a debate raging right now about what do you mean when you say this thing matters? That automatically means this other thing does not. Well, no. It just we're talking about one thing, but I mean, there's room for words to mean more than just the one thing, and knock it off with the hate, why don't you? Sorry, yes, we might be seeping into the messages, morals, and that whole part of it, but...
No, but I think that's fine.
That's what this episode is, though, honestly.
It is. It really is.
I'm amazed the number of times that I watched this episode. Still, every time it's over? I mean, it flies. But now I'm really going into the next segment, so please, somebody stop me.
Okay. I'll bring up a topic that was mentioned. I can't remember exactly where or by whom, but...
Sorry, I just read your note. That's awesome. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, somebody had said, there's something kind of offensive about this. Why do we talk to foreigners in loud, slow phrases when they don't understand? And they won't understand because the language is different. And I actually did a little bit of research on this because I thought it was a good question, because it's perceived in almost every culture as being rude and condescending, and yet it is an incredibly human thing. Apparently, the idea behind it is that when you say something to somebody else and they don't speak your language and they clearly don't understand anything that you've just said, our sort of reactive brain kicks in and we assume that the other person didn't hear what we said. So we do that quite by impulse, and we all know that it's rude and condescending if it's done to us, but we kind of can't help ourselves, no matter what the culture is, from doing exactly that. But we see that happen in this episode. And again, neither is being rude or condescending to each other, whether it's Dathan or Picard. They're being frustrated with each other.
Yeah.
They're desperate at a certain point with each other. But I did want to mention that because I thought this was a really interesting psychological thing that is pervasive in every single culture on Earth. We just sort of do it by reaction.
I was glad to see that it happened with both.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That both sides did that. I mean, as opposed to just, the unthinking aliens doing it or the stupid humans doing it, that they were both like... that they both kept yelling the same things over and over at each other was kind of amusing.
Right. Well, and that's how sometimes when you do understand the word, sometimes debates just devolve into yelling the same words at each other and hoping that something will change. Hey, I do have some questions about this. I wondered to myself if the Tamarians were maybe a little too dedicated to peace, or at least to the methods that they thought would achieve peace. And then I asked, is there such a thing as being too dedicated? Maybe not to peace, but maybe to the method. We will fight together to gain common ground, and that ship will blow anyone out of the sky trying to change that. So at what point is that all counterproductive?
See, I was actually wondering if that was the Children of Tama, or Tama, or however it is, being too dedicated to peace, or if that was just his crew being that dedicated. I mean, because think about it, his first officer argued with him. Yeah. Until he told him to, be like the river in winter, which I loved. He argued and argued and argued, but then once the captain had made his decision, that's it. So I wasn't sure that it was that they were actually that dedicated to peace as much as that crew was that dedicated to their captain. Like he had said, and so now it's done. Because they watched him die. Yeah. They watched their captain die on their sensors, but they still didn't, remove the field that would have let them lift him out of there. And they didn't lift him out of there, and they didn't send somebody down to save him. They were very much dedicated to what their captain was dedicated to at that point. If the first officer had been able to win over and said, no, we're not going to do that, we're going to do the other metaphor, then, it would have gone very different. And they might have still, at that point, been as dedicated to peace, but it was only Dathan, actually, who was that radical as far as, no, this is how this is going to be done. It's been 100 years already. Enough's enough.
Maybe what if the other method of peace was a pizza party.
Ken, at Showbiz, his 13th birthday.
Joshua, at NORAD, the game setup.
Ken and John at the end of the show.
That is exactly what I was thinking. That is exactly.
It's not metaphor.
Yeah,
it's not metaphor either.
No, it's not.
I want to ask you the closing questions of our show. And first of all, I think I know how this is going to go.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure if I were to predict the future, I think I know how this is going to go, but I'm not going to spoil it. I want to ask you if you feel that this episode holds up.
This episode is amazing. This episode, yes, holds up on so many levels. Production-wise, I think it works. Design-wise, I think it works. The writing, I think, is absolutely amazing. I've actually made a glossary of all of the terms that they used, and I'm not going to be able to work them into conversation. There is one that still eludes me, but the rest of them, I think I figured it out. Cool. So on that level, it's fun. But then just the story that they're telling as well. I mean, I do think, and we've talked in the past few weeks about, well, am I getting into the morals now?
I don't know. It's your call.
No, I think it's fantastic. Yes, I think the episode holds up. It flies by. I seriously, every time I was amazed that we were coming to the end of the show. There's not a wasted moment, I don't think, in this episode. You could argue whether the B plot actually needed to be there. I mean, we certainly could have had them just on the planet the whole time and come back, with the exception of like maybe Picard phases out and phases back in, phases out, phases back in, and then is left there. We could have come back at the end and had the Enterprise say, we've been working so hard on getting you back here, and it would have been completely believable. There would have been no problem. But even the stuff that was happening up top, I mean, up in orbit, wasn't wasted. It didn't feel to me, because it showed the struggle of what they would be going through to get him back. This is a tight episode that if you asked me if it was a full-length episode, I wouldn't think so, because there not a second of it dragged to me. This was just, I think this holds up and holds up and holds up. And harkens so much back to the stuff I loved, like the original series episodes. This is, I mean, as we said before, this could have been any captain. This could have been any crew. And you even could have done, I think you even could have done this episode as TOS. I mean, I think this episode could have turned up from 66 to 69 and had there be, no problem with it whatsoever. So, I think, I mean, to me, there's absolutely no question that this episode holds up. But, of course, it is tradition to ask each other. So I do pose the question. Do you think it holds up, John?
For better or for worse, when we approach a show, this is one of those that just sort of everybody loves. Not everybody, but there's this kind of anticipation when we get to a show like this, because we start to hear people say, oh, I can't wait until you get to Darmok. I love it, and this and that. And that's cool. It's kind of taken on a life of its own. And I did something I almost never do, which is I started reading comments from our listeners before we recorded this, mainly because our listeners were sneaky. And they dropped in their comments into our comments section about the previous episode. So this will not be a thing from now on, okay? There were more critical views of this than I expected, and actually agree with some of what I read, that there's no way that the culture of the Children of Tama would thrive and develop warp engines, etc., and there's no way that they would be able to grow the way they have. You can't have a language that is only based on metaphor and stories, and that, in my opinion, is totally right. And then I didn't care. The episode is about language as metaphor. And as we've pointed out at least once, Star Trek is metaphor. None of the people are real. We're supposed to learn something from the experience of the story. There's all that technobabble, and it's just there because the writers are confirming to the audience, yes, we understand. We really can't go in and get Picard out that easily. Fine, we'll let that be. What stands out here to me more than anything else is the tenderness and urgency of Picard telling the story of Gilgamesh to Dathan. That is by far the most powerful scene out of anything in this episode. I was nearly in tears because of the intimacy of that scene, the way it's played, the importance to Picard, and the beauty of the metaphor of doing everything we can to find some way to connect with each other. I thought about an adult telling a child a bedtime story. It's not about the words, it's about the intent. Mm-hmm. And that what was completely beautiful about that scene. This production is a tribute to how good the direction is, how good the writing is, how good the actors are. Paul Winfield, again, is just amazing. An actor has a hard enough job anyway with a script to make the words feel alive and make them feel real. And when you hand an actor a script in which the words make no sense, it becomes that much more difficult. And he does an absolutely incredible job because you feel everything along with them. And man, does it hold up to replay.
Yeah.
We watch these episodes several times before we do a show, and I couldn't wait to watch it again.
Yeah. Really quickly, when you're talking about Paul Winfield, how many times did we hear Shaka when the walls fell? And yet he does different deliveries of that are wonderful, including the one by the fire when he's like, Shaka, when the walls fell.
Right.
You are so screwing this up, but it's funny because look at you. I mean, there's like resignation sometimes when that's said. There's anger sometimes when that's said. There's taunting sometimes when that's said. Yeah, which is, I mean, to be able to deliver basically nonsensical words in ways that convey very different meanings. You do have to give him props to that. I'm sorry, I stopped you on another thought, though.
No. Because that's the end of it. Other than to say that I completely agree with you. This is definitive Star Trek in the way that we refer to other episodes that are definitive, like the Corbomite maneuver, story ideas, or metaphysical ideas like what are little girls made of. This is one of those definitive Star Trek ideas. Encapsulated in this episode. So I can't help but love it and recommend it. And maybe I'll watch it again when we're done with the show today. So that brings us to then what are the morals, meanings, messages, which we kind of already hit in our discussion. But if you want to wrap some of them up, what did you pick up here?
Well, I mean, you mentioned the Corbomite maneuver a minute ago, and I know one of the lessons that we took from the Corbomite maneuver was your enemy isn't necessarily your enemy. I mean, even if they seem like it. I mean, Picard, and in fairness, the guy came at him with a couple of daggers and tried to give him a dagger. And so, Picard assumes that he is his enemy, but then coming to realize, no, he's not. Bigger than that, though, I think it's a story about just really having to understand really where the other person is coming from. And I mean, really understand it. I think I mentioned a few weeks ago, this is not like you look at something on paper and say, oh, well, that sounds really bad for somebody. I mean, Picard has to, he's like in an immersive language class, right? He has to know where Dathan is coming from. And in gaining that understanding and grokking that fullness, they reach. They're actually able to, he tells the story of Gilgamesh and what was the other person's name? I apologize.
Ikiru.
Okay. Yes, Gilgamesh and his friend. He tells the story of Gilgamesh and his friend leaving as friends. And that's where they came to there. And there was obvious sadness when Picard had to tell them in words that nobody else on the bridge understood that Dathan had died. And there was obvious sadness when Picard told them that. And of course there's sadness on their end because that's their captain. But there was sadness when Picard told them that as well. And it all came from a place of understanding. It all came from a place of actually knowing who this person was, knowing what his frame of reference was, because then, hey, guess what? Turns out he's just like me. And that's a very Star Trek message, all the way from 64 maybe, or 66 anyway, right through hopefully whatever they come out with long after we're done with this show. What about you, sir? What other messages did you pick up?
Yeah, I obviously I agree with what you're saying there. We did hit on this a little bit in this episode, and we talked before about how the Federation approach versus, say, the Klingon approach, maybe, is that peace is the default position. Everything in this episode is trying to maintain that, even when the situation is either unknown or dire. And, Riker gets to a breaking point which I think is an interesting thing to debate. You can kind of go back and say, well, did he do the right thing? Did he not do the right thing? Would Picard have handled this differently if he were in command? But regardless, it's just there to get us sort of from point A to point B and build the drama while this other drama is unfolding on the planet. But yeah, this is an episode that uses metaphor to be a metaphor about communication. Picard says it in the very beginning that communication is about patience and imagination. I don't know if you saw this video that was going around for a little while. It was a video of a former CIA agent talking to Americans about terrorism. Mm-hmm. And her name is Amaryllis Fox. And she did a video. She worked with the CIA at one point, and she talks about kind of the different views on terrorism and how that affects foreign policy in the U.S. and what we're doing. We would try to take on this massive and horrible problem in other parts of the world. But there's something that she said in that video that I think is so on the money about the metaphor that this story is asking us to contemplate. She said in her video, quote, "The only real way to disarm your enemy is to listen to them. If you hear them out, if you're brave enough to really listen to their story, you can see that more often than not, you might have made some of the same choices if you'd lived their life instead of yours." And that absolutely is one of those sort of definitive Star Trek ideas that is played out so nicely in this episode to say that we get so much further when we actually stop to listen and comprehend, and then listen and show some compassion to what the other person wants. We said that this could be any other captain, but there's something so perfect about Picard being molded as this diplomat that he's the one who goes through this process. Mm-hmm. I think we would have liked to have seen Kirk go through this, because Kirk's diplomacy is a different thing. but there is something so perfect about Picard being in this situation too. Yeah. So I would say that every one of those messages holds up, and many, many more. And this is an episode where Star Trek, even more than it already is, becomes a piece of theater, where it really is just about putting yourself into the idea rather than trying to accept the reality of this situation of a starship captain 400 years in the future out on a planet with an alien. Honestly, none of that matters, because what matters is the communication that they have and the respect that they develop for each other through that process.
Mission Log is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. Executive producer Rod Roddenberry. Find out more at roddenberry.com. For more exciting Star Trek podcasts, check out Trek FM, that is trek.fm. And for the latest in Star Trek news and discussion, be sure to visit trekmovie.com.
Next week, Ensign Rowe.
Some of the music for Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com, and from the album Messages by Key Theory, free to download at kitheory.com.
What if the other method of peace was a pizza party?
Ken at Showbiz, his 13th birthday. That's a true story.
It is good. That's good.
And transmission.